Sooners of Oklahoma at 12-0 and still looking for respect nationwide.
What is going on, Sooner Nation? Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the Barry and Mac Show. As always, myself, Barry, personal trainer, sports performance coach out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And alongside me, former Sooner wide receiver, 2000 national champ, Mr. Damian Mackey. How are we doing today, D-Mac?
What's going on, B? Long time no see, man. It's good to be back in the saddle, rocking and rolling with my brother from another. It's been months, bro. It's been, I want to say, since the bowl game, checking out, taking care of family stuff, business stuff, you know what I'm saying, transitions. I'm ready to get rocking and rolling, bro. Like my juices are flowing, and I'm excited about this pod today and then what we got coming up. So let's get into it.
Yeah, man, for sure. So this is going to be a little bit different format, but I think you guys are going to like it. We're going to keep things really concise. As D-Mac said, got some changes on the horizon, but we'll get to those at a later date. Today, we're going to be talking about OU's first year going into the SEC, and I'm going to kick it over to Damian first. What we're going to do is talk about why OU will win 9 or more games in the inaugural SEC season, and then why they won't. So, D-Mac, should we start with the good or with the bad?
You always got to go good first, baby. Always got to go good first.
All right. Man, so I'm gonna kick it over to you, brother. Tell Sooner Nation why OU is going to win 9+ games this coming season in the SEC.
Yeah, the easy answer, the very simple answer is football today, especially as you go up in levels. The college game, the NFL game is quarterback driven. And if there's one thing we did do last season, although we give props to Dylan, right? He carried the torch through the transition. We've got our guy. And we saw the pup make some throws in the bowl game. We saw him make a few mistakes, you know what I'm saying? Some things that didn't work out in our favor. But I'm here to tell you, quarterback play will win you 3 or 4 games that you had no business winning if you just have a guy who's a jag, right? So we don't. We have a bona fide player. I don't even like to talk about him being a blue chip and 5-star anymore. He's got some skins that he's handled on the field, right? Some of the throws he made to Anderson in the Tulsa game, again in the bowl game against Arizona, some of the throws he made were throws we just hadn't seen in 2 years, and it was on the fly with 10 practices. So Jackson Arnold is going to be good enough to win us 2 games a minimum that we had no business winning, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah, man, I'm right there with you. But I'm going to say it's got to be the defensive side of the ball for me. Jackson is the easy answer. He's the answer that, at the end of the day, as you said, quarterback-driven league, quarterback-driven sport. The offense is required to score points for you to be able to win the game. Can't win with 0. But the improvements incrementally that OU has made year by year on the defensive side of the ball, and this coming season, starting with the defensive line, I know everybody's going to say, well, Stone, Jackson, some of those guys won't have an impact this year. I have a strong feeling at least 2 true freshmen make a significant impact on that defensive front. Well, we've seen it now where the development of these high school guys is just so good. And we've also seen from film now that guys like Jaden Jackson, David Stone, they can just do things that other guys on that roster can't, who have been there 4, 5, golly, some maybe even 6 with all the COVID stuff. But Jackson, to me, is certainly a reason why OU pushes over that 9 mark. But and probably, a game like LSU, that's where a quarterback is going to matter, right? A game like going to they don't go to Knoxville this year, but they do. I believe they go to Ole Miss. That game, quarterback gonna matter. But when you got Tennessee coming into Norman, right? A game where it's going to be interesting, right? Tennessee's got some players. To me, those are the games where your consistent defensive play is going to be what wins the day or what doesn't. And you got to be able to show up on a regular basis.
Let me add something to that. Styles make fights. Styles make fights, right? And if we want to talk about anecdotal or data, the the Big 12 transplants who have gone into the SEC, their first few years are their most successful years, right? And so transitioning from a Big 12 style of play to the SEC style of play, listen, the SEC is going to try to slug you. But here's the misconception that people always get misconstrued. The SEC has big, strong, athletic dudes, but they're not designed to play at an up-tempo pace. Right. So when you're playing against a Mississippi State or an Ole Miss or even a Kentucky, right, Tennessee, those guys are they're gonna stand in the B gap and knock you over the head. However, A&M showed us when they left the Big 12 as an extra mediocre team. Missouri showed us when they left the Big 12 as an extra mediocre team, right? When you transition to the SEC, those guys are not comfortable doing 80, 90 snaps a game. They're going to be tired in the third and fourth quarters. OU is going to go into the SEC next year. There's going to be two teams who on paper are at par or better than them, and that's going to be Alabama. We don't play Georgia, right? It'll be Alabama. Tennessee will be close, right? LSU will have some dudes, but there's not going to be teams that on paper are going to be far and above better than us, but our guys will have played in a conference where they're going to get 15 to 20 more snaps a game. And those snaps are going to be quality snaps against an SEC opponent. Mark my words, the Auburns, the Ole Misses, and I'm not talking about preparation for a bowl game, right? I got to say the SEC generally does a good job of prepping for bowl games when you've got that 3 to 4 week delay, right? And you've got one game to play. But when you play the schedule SEC teams play, and then you've got OU on the schedule, and we're gonna ramp it up, right? 20, 35 octanes faster than most of your other opponents. And we're going to have quality depth. And we're going to have just as good a dudes as those SEC teams. That's why I don't have a ton of fear or anxiety or worry, because we've got good enough players to line up against Tennessee and tackle the B gap. We've got good enough players to go against LSU without Daniels, right? And match up. Our secondary and D line are SEC good, ladies and gentlemen. Go back and look at our dudes on the third level and on the first level. We can match up with the run of the mill SEC team. So when you talk about getting to 9 wins and you talk about having a quarterback who can beat you with his arm, his legs, and we'll see if his mind is as good as we think it is. But when we get into third and fourth quarters, playing against team with equal or probably even a little lesser talent than we have, they're not going to be ready for the amount of conditioning that's going to be necessary to beat the OU. Mark my words. We're going to win a game in the fourth quarter that we're behind, minimum 1, because we're going to be able to impose our will. 9 wins.
Man, I think to kind of carry on with that point, we saw it in 2015. Right? How many people in 2015 when OU went to Knoxville and Bob Stoops was coming off a tough 2014, they said, based on what they saw in 2014 with Cody Thomas out there, quarterback, yeah, you had Stryker. I think you had a Frank Shannon at backer. You had a Samaje Perine, right? But you didn't, they said you didn't have enough, not to compete with the blue chippers. What you saw in that game was what you're talking about. You saw Tennessee jump out to a pretty good lead, and then you saw that conditioning take over, right? Yep. That was still a Jerry Schmidt squad that when OU got to that fourth quarter, they ate, man. They ate the entire second half of the game, and they just looked like the more well-conditioned team. They were the team that was equipped to make plays when it mattered in crunch time. And I think that's obviously a small window into that's going back now 8 years ago. But, man, even though some has changed, the type of players they're still trying to bring in at those big tier programs, like a Tennessee, still very similar. So fascinating to see this upcoming season. But let's flip this thing the other way, man. It is the SEC. Can't be all sunshine and rainbows, because then it's not the Barry and Mac show. If it's all sunshine and rainbows,
right.
that's well, we get just as much grief as we do praise. So let's talk about, and I'm gonna let you go first again. I kind of like this. Let's talk about why OU is going to struggle to get to that 9-win mark. What will be the things that hold them up this coming season?
It'll be the offensive line of scrimmage. It's going to be a level up or two with our offensive protection in the pass game and moving the line of scrimmage in the run game. I don't know personnel-wise. We lost Green in the transfer portal, right? That obviously doesn't help. We graduate our, I would say not best, but our most talented, our right tackle, Guyton, going on to the NFL. And then, of course, we lose our center. So you're talking about the brain trust, your most talented, and then the highest ceiling player are all gone. Those are unknowns, right? And so it'll be interesting to see what this spring looks like. But I think the number one red flag that we're going to have as in terms of concern going into the 2024 season is going to be how we manage the line of scrimmage. Right. Quarterback play is going to help that, but being able to just run an inside zone and move a guard or double team a 3 technique and get up to the second level, that's going to be it's just going to be a different experience playing in the SEC. And then also, I believe, in Seth's offense, a lot of his pass game is off of action. So if the defense doesn't believe you're going to run the ball, the action isn't going to be as efficient, and you're not going to force them to go to a single high versus 2 high. And then you got 2 safeties and you got a shell coverage. So it's going to be interesting to see how productive we'll be running the football and then running action off of it. If we don't get those 3 areas fixed, right, we've got a lot of spots to fill. We've got some talent coming in. We've got some kids who've been in the program, but they are unknowns. And our offensive line has been consistently slow the last 4 seasons. Since Creed and those guys went on to the NFL, 18, 19, whatever those years were really Creed left after the other guys left, right? But since that team has transitioned out, we've always started the year slow. We can't afford to do that in the SEC this year. That's going to be number one reason I have concerns of us getting to 9 wins.
Man, I can't say I disagree with you. I was on a recent podcast not too long ago, and we talked about that. I know people have discussed the players coming in, but like an EPL, right? Guys like that. But we've seen with Beatonbow, and you were a guy who obviously Beatonbow wasn't a coach when you played, but you kind of know Venable's old school mindset with wanting young guys to really get seasoned. Right, especially along the offensive line. To me, putting your hopes and dreams in a guy like that panning out immediately with what we know historically is Beatonbow's MO, I think is a pipe dream, right? I don't see that being likely. I think they're going to dance with who they have. They did go out to the portal. They did get a few guys. I don't know if they were able to bring in any game changers, even to the level of a Walter Rouse, who was a ready to go out of the box. He just needed, and Beatonbow improved him, right? And NFL Scout said as much. Beatonbow improved him, but the mental side was there. The drive and the discipline was there. You weren't having to essentially train a young college kid to do what he needed to do. Rouse wanted to get to the NFL, and OU was that stepping stone. We can't yet be confident that your Taylors and your Sextons, your EPLs, your Bates, your other guys across that line of scrimmage are there yet. That's why losing a Caden Green was such a big deal, because you knew that he had it physically, but based on him getting on the field as a freshman, you also knew he had it up here. And that's a big deal. That is a big deal. And I don't think that can be understated. But to me, man, got to pick it up at running back. I think bringing in a guy like Tatum, he's a player who legitimate speed. He's a 22, 23 mile an hour guy. He's a guy who can really push it, but
Is he
with
23?
losing,
Is he 23?
yeah,
Is he 23?
they clocked him at
Wow.
23 miles an hour. Yep.
Wow. That's
Yep.
respect.
I remember all the talk on Caden Durham was, look at his speed. And Durham was more of an accelerator. He was more of an
Sure.
out the gate. Tatum, it takes him a little bit to get up to speed. But, man, when he gets there, he can run away from everybody. Yeah, they clocked him at, I want to say it was 22.7 and pushing 23 on a consistent basis. He can really, really, really scoot. But that was a position, man, a year ago where there was a lot. We talked about it all season. Well, where in times when the offensive line was performing well, the running backs were just missing things by a hair, right? People were talking negatively about Murray and about the just the ability for these guys to learn and know the game. Rotation wise, you weren't seeing guys who we felt as fans and onlookers looking were the best guys playing in the game. Well, we thought the guys sitting at the 2 and 3 spot were probably better than the guys starting out there at the 1 spot. And we won't get into names; they're long gone. But I think it's important that OU solidify that position. I can't think of a team that has won the SEC that didn't at least have one kind of bona fide back there. But one guy who can go get some yards. That they have every team that's been to the game and won, right? Even Alabama, Jace McClellan, right, was a guy who had a nice, some good looks against Michigan and really gave it to him. It shows you how important that is, right? Offensive line can be solid, they can be good, but man, if you don't have the guys back there toting the rock who can find the gap, find the hole, and hit the gas, I think you're still going to have problems. You got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I think that's a compounding concern, right? One, the O-line moving people. Two, running backs with the talent to actually exploit any opportunities we get. We just saw a marriage of that not happening last year. But you also touched on something, and Barry, I think it's separate, and we need to speak to it separately. Mismanaging of rotations by coaches. It's been an issue. By the way, it's been an issue for years. In the secondary, we've belabored that for a long time. Running back has been obviously an issue the last 2 or 3 years where we're not seeing the same thing the coach is seeing in terms of why the distribution of carries are divvied up the way they are. Offensive line, right? These are guys that are clearly getting their ass whooped. Why are these guys continue to roll out there? And then lo and behold, 7 games later, this other kid comes up and he's actually playing pretty good. What would have happened had he gotten carry or opportunities sooner? So I think, and it's a concern. It's not a guarantee because we're not there to see practice. You know what I'm saying? We don't know how guys are doing on the practice fields, but I think mismanagement of the roster or depth chart by some of the coaches is something to pay close attention to going into the 2024 season. And I do think it's a potential reason why we could lose a game. I do believe there is a philosophy, and like you said, right, you're going to play the experience over the talent unless it's overwhelming. I think that's kind of a philosophy we have. And that started with Bob. Outside of my first couple of years, it was a free for all. My first couple of years, it was if you could play, you could play, and I'm grateful for that because I got to play as a freshman. But I hope, I believe, and this is the bias. This is a Sooner in me coming out. I hope and believe the best will play, whether irrespective or regardless of age. And I hope and believe that the talent that is available will have an opportunity to show itself in spring, in summer camp, in fall camp, and then preseason, getting prepared. I will say this. I like our preseason schedule, the way it sets up to prepare us going into that SEC schedule. We've got a couple of games that are winnable where a lot of guys can get some reps. But, and I don't know if this was a Levy thing or if it was a BV thing, but to me, our substitution patterns in the preseason gave a lot of guys opportunities to show success. Right? We saw Petaway get a ton of snaps. We saw Gibson get a ton of snaps. Right? We saw a lot of those receivers and the running backs. And then we got into conference And it was like, wait a minute, right? Petaway was playing good enough to get some snaps. You know what I'm saying? Sawchuk was playing well enough in the preseason to get some snaps, and then when it got to conference, right, that depth chart really got drawn back. I hope this year, guys that show that they're prepared in the preseason, they make plays when the ball goes that way. Because I think the best example is Gibson, right? Gibson's getting like one
Oh
or two
man.
attempts the first 5 games of the seasons. He scored 2 or 3 touchdowns. He's making big plays. He got Gorilla Nuts Player of the Week a couple of times, but he's really not seeing the field. And then, of course, the last 4 or 5 games, he might be the best player, our best receiver the last 3 or 4 games. Him and Anderson had kind of fallen back a little bit, and Gibson was ascending. So I look at how roster management, depth chart management, that's going to be something to pay attention to. And if it's not done correctly, it could be the reason why we lose a game.
Yeah, I mean, man, I'm right there with you on that. I think it's something that defensive side of the ball, offensive side of the ball, we've seen it. We've seen it for a few years now. My hope, that as someone watching from afar, is that a lot of this kind of the rotation issues is just attributed to the turnover in staff, not knowing who you got, wanting to go with the older guy just on the trust factor, things still being a little bit new, things still being a little bit new for a lot of the even the older players, but they're the ones who you just seem to have your trust in. Man, want to do this before we kind of get out of here, change subjects a little bit, and move on. I want to go over the schedule just really fast, and we'll talk about where some of those hangups might be. And non-conference, as you kind of spoke to, you got Temple, Houston, and Tulane. Tulane, they played back in the COVID year. Houston, Jalen Hurts had his opportunity back in 2019. Has OU played Temple before?
Not to my knowledge. Maybe historically, but not any time since the 90s, no.
Yeah, it's been a while. But what you spoke to was you got Tennessee, Auburn, and Texas. And then you finish with the meat of that schedule later on, South Carolina, Ole Miss. You've got that SEC non-conference rum-dum in Maine, right in the middle. Maine right there before you have Missouri. Then OU's got a bye week perfectly placed right before they play Alabama and LSU. The bye week's a little bit later in the year, but man, before Alabama and LSU, I don't think you can that you could ask for anything better than that. I do want to ask you, Saban leaving, Alabama retiring, almost similar vein to how Stoops did it. He did it a little bit more on the heels of the season. Saban did, but kind of leaving the program in a good spot, giving Alabama a chance to go out and find a really good coach, in the Washington coach, DeBoer. I want to ask you, do you think Alabama is able to maintain some semblance of what they've built? Do you think they honestly needed a little bit of revitalization? Was it one of those deals kind of like Stoops had, where later in that career, he had a nice little resurgence towards the end to give the keys to Riley, but fans felt it. There was a slight shift down. Do you think Alabama is able to kind of right the ship with Saban leaving and maybe take this thing to another level? Or do you think this is the end of the Bama dynasty as we know it?
I do think Bama's going to come back to the pack. I do think Bama's going to stay an upper echelon SEC team. I do believe DeBoer is a great offensive mind. But let's call it is what it is. He got lightning in a bottle with the quarterback and those receivers, and Michael Penix. But it's gonna depend on how dynamic his quarterback is. If he can't, and we all know Alabama has recruited 5 stars who have been duds, and they've gotten some guys who've obviously, turned them into one of the junior QBUs in the NFL, right? They got Tua and the kid at the Patriots. So they've got some guys who's come through there the last, second half of the decade. Obviously, the kid who went first overall this last draft to to Carolina and played terrible. But DeBoer's offense is going to be highly dependent upon his quarterback. He's got a cupboard with some guys. So he's not starting the program over. But I got to tell you, Bama's beatable. I look at our schedule, and I think they say we have the number 2 schedule in America. And I know I'm going off a little bit, but I got to tell you, Auburn is not, right? Auburn is not like, oh my God, Auburn with Cam Newton. And Tennessee came back to reality last year, and they're going to have issues with quarterback. We're going to see what their quarterback situation looks like going into the season. Bama is in a transition year, and LSU lost their Heisman quarterback. It's going to me, Barry, with all due respect to the SEC, it kind of reminds me of the Big 12 I played in. Colorado was not a pushover, but Colorado was Colorado. Missouri was, that you couldn't just skip practice that week and expect to win. But damn it, they're beatable. We had Nebraska. We had K-State. We had Texas. A&M back in those days was, again, playing those guys in College Station. So, I look at the schedule, and you know what I say? I say OU's back to the calibre. I like to say calibre instead of caliber. They're back to the calibre of schedule that we were accustomed to. We're in the best conference in America. But it's not like we're not paying the best of Alabama plus the best of Georgia plus the best of LSU plus Tennessee 2 years ago. We're playing, we'll see. They got to play us. Damn it. We stay healthy. I like our chances.
Man, that's a great analogy because you guys really got Nebraska on the back. You guys didn't get 94, 95, 96 Nebraska, right? You guys got a Nebraska that was still very good, an elite team, and Solich was rolling, but it wasn't Tom Osborne, Nebraska. Right, at K-State, you've talked about it, was really the team you've said that kind of maybe was the tougher out, in terms of just watching the film and lining up against them. So I think you're onto something. But before we get out of here, quick predictions, and we may change this as we go. This is first year of the 12-team playoff, right? First year of the Barry and Mac Show being an official SEC podcast, which is big time. We might, how they got the SEC logo on the jersey? We might have to put the SEC logo right down here. I don't know. We'll figure something out. But does Oklahoma make the 12-team playoff this coming year? And I'm not going to hold you to nothing right now. We'll lock them in when we get closer to the season. But is OU a top 12 team by season's end next year?
So here's how I rationalize it. I feel like the SEC probably gets 3 in. I look at it like this, right? You got 5 champions. That's 5 of there's 7 left. I think the SEC and the Big 10 get an additional 2 seeds, right? So you take 5 plus 4, that's 9. And then that leaves 3 for the field. So the question I ask myself is, can OU make it into the top 3, right? Can OU make it into the top 3? The Texas game is probably and as far as I'm concerned, the most anxious game I see on the schedule. They've got continuity. The quarterback's coming back, right? They've got talent, and they're coming off a big year, right? So I think those guys are going to be, so long as they don't have injuries, to me, that's the most difficult game on the schedule, and that's our little brother. We beat that ass. Like, we know how to handle them if we need to handle them, right? If you made me bet today, 2 things would happen. Number one, I'd take a couple $1,000. I'm betting, Barry, probably 20. I told my wife, like, hey, we're going to fly to Vegas. I'm betting $2,500 that we get the over on 7.5. 7.5. I heard it was 6.5. 6.5. I bet $5,000.
It was.
I heard.
I think it. I saw both. The 6.5 was what got pushed, but then when you went to some of the sports books, I saw 7.5. Yeah. So yeah,
I'm gonna still bet $2,500.
It's still crazy.
I'm gonna bet $2,500 on 7.5. Like, that main game at the second half of the season, and you watch Bama and or Tennessee are gonna have injury issues or quarterback issues, and I think those are gonna be winnable games for us. I'd bet $2,500. Playoffs, the max I would bet. I'm 55-45, yes, because I'm not a punk. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to ever say that we aren't good enough. But I'd probably max the bet out at $50. A tank of gas.
Oh, okay.
I'd probably today, if you asked me today, I'd max my bet out at a tank of gas. So that's
like a half a tank of gas these days, man. Jeez. Man, I'm probably there with you. I think OU for the first time in a while has a legitimate top 12 to top 6 roster in terms of just talent. Now, it's not seasoned yet, right? You really want David Stone 2 and 3 years into the program.
Facts.
Right? You want that kind of guy. You want a Danny Okoye 2 to 3 years deep into the program. But in terms of raw blue chip talent, when Venables came to Oklahoma, when it felt like Riley was missing on the defensive side of the ball, recruiting big time guys, I gotta say, this is the first time you can look to that roster and say blue chippers outnumbering the non-blue chippers on the defensive side. Same thing on the offensive side of the ball. So roster-wise, OU should be able to go out there and compete with anyone. The question is, there's still a young squad. You've still got a lot of question marks at different positions, and not all positions are kind of coming up to speed at the same time. They haven't yet hit that that kind of moment where everything sort of meshes together, where the D-line's kind of rising, the linebackers are there, the receivers are hitting, right, which is what you need to have a championship run, right? So I think they're probably still a year off with that, but man, if you had me bet today, I would still probably say that they make it into the top 12. Honestly, just coming off the SEC, I think Tennessee is going to take a little dip. That they had their struggles this offseason too with some of the things that came out. Alabama, that even last year we saw some of the chinks in that armor a little bit.
Yep.
And now, so there's a little bit of rebuild on the defensive side of the ball, especially, right? And does Alabama, with a coach like Venables coming into the SEC, right? Defensive mind. You got a Kirby Smart over there in Georgia. He's still ready to go. Georgia, I think, had they made it to the playoff this past year, probably is playing in the national championship still. That they were really good. They just, against Alabama, they just didn't have it. They just didn't have it. The offensively, that they really needed some things to come together. And I bet you Kirby Smart goes back to the drawing board this past season and gets that done. But it'll be interesting nonetheless. Sooner Nation, I hope you guys enjoyed this today. D-Mac, before we get out of here, man, any closing thoughts, as we always do, brother?
I'm just excited to be back in the saddle. It's been a very busy last 6 months. Salute to you, bro. You know what I'm saying? It's always a pleasure to do this with you, man. Still a pleasure project for me. I appreciate the sponsorship and them checks we get. The checks is cute.
For sure.
Salute to you guys for listening to the show. But I just enjoy talking ball with my boy. I look forward to getting up to Norman and checking out the program and sitting down with Coach V and talking to some of my boys up there. Just kind of get a temperament of what's happening in the program, and seeing for myself. I can go to some practices. I can drive up to Norman and actually be around the program that I love and been a part of for so many years. So I look forward to doing some of that this coming spring, and then of course again in the fall.
Love it. Sooner Nation, as always, make sure to go follow the show on Instagram at the Barry and Mac Show. Man, this thing's going to be kicking on YouTube, man. We are going full whole hog into the YouTube world. Got all the nuts and bolts on that thing finally figured out. And as always, please make sure to go follow the Instagram at The Barry and Mac Show. Twitter is at Barry and Mac SHW. You can find me on Instagram at BWise Fitness, at letter B WISE Fitness. And Damian is Dame That Dude. And if you go over to X, same thing, at letter B WISE Fitness. But Damian at D_Mac13. Thank you all so much for tuning in today to the Barry and Mac Show. We will see you
looking for respect
soon.
nationwide. nationwide.